Start with contracting sprites. Chapter 51, Expert at Making Money, Little Su Hao. Translator, Atlas Studios. The buses stopped moving, and Su Hao alighted in a daze. He slapped his cheeks, took in a breath of fresh air, and was finally awake. This is the battle preparation village. The name of the village sounded weird. From what Su Hao could see, the place looked like a tourist village. Surrounded by mountains and rivers, there was greenery everywhere. It was said that there were special battle venues, training halls, cafeterias, and hotels in the village. Not to mention sightseeing spots. After arriving at their destination, Su Hao and the others did not check into the hotel first, but headed toward the cafeteria to eat. Everyone was hungry as they had set off at 8 o'clock in the morning and had been on the bus for nearly 5 hours. Fortunately, be it accommodation or meals, all these had already been arranged by the schools, so they don't have to worry about anything. When he arrived at the hotel room, Su Hao put down the suitcase and laid on his bed. On the bed beside him, was Lu Ren. Su Hao wanted to give a bad review. All along, the students each had a room to themselves during the Sprite Cultivator assessment. Why was this different now? As he laid down, Silkworm Baby, which had been sitting on top of his head, rolled to the front of the bed and slammed against the wall. It wriggled a little. When it saw the suitcase beside the bed, it got up and jumped onto it. It used its head to push but was unable to open the numeric lock. When using its short legs to press, its vision was unfortunately blocked. Neither could it attempt to destroy it through violent means, or else that devil Su Hao would definitely confiscate its pocket money. It thought for a while and spat out a white silk thread that was a palm's length. The thread became hardened like a skinny pencil, which it held in its mouth to move the dials of the numeric lock. Within 2 clicks, the lock was opened. Silkworm Baby called out to Little Fire Crow, which flew over quickly. It grabbed the zipper with its claws and flew around the suitcase, unzipping it. It then grabbed the upper half of the suitcase again with its claws and opened the whole suitcase completely. Gurgle. Silkworm Baby carefully dragged out the laptop. While biting onto it with its mouth, it shot a silk thread from its front legs onto the ceiling. The spiritual force-powered silk thread contracted, lifting it up together with the laptop. Silkworm Baby then shot a silk thread onto the wall next to the table. It used the 2 silk threads to pull and drag the laptop, carefully placing it on the table. Gurgle. Its mission was successfully completed. Silkworm Baby and Little Fire Crow hid behind the laptop. They appeared a little sinister when illuminated by the light of the machine. Not far away, a little charcoal tortoise was shaking its head. It felt like a new world had been opened. Su Hao had a good nap. When he woke up, it was already 3 or 4 in the afternoon. It couldn't be helped, it was already past 2 when lunch was over. It was definitely not because he was in a deep slumber. As the joint examination was approaching, Su Hao did not arrange any training tasks for the 2 little fellows today. Instead, he allowed them to have some fun so that they could fight harder tomorrow. Su Hao pondered over the intel he had collected. Primordial forest area, wild sprites, the other students. Not surprisingly, this is the resist and survive model. Strategy was very important. It was impossible to charge in and confront everything head-on unless one sprite could demolish the entire battlefield. As a sprite trainer that strategized and planned before taking action, Su Hao spent quite some time thinking. Let's just be reckless. He leisurely made himself a cup of tea and began to enjoy the remaining half of the day. Bang! The door of the room opened, and Lu Ren's big round face peered in. Su Hao, look what I've gotten. Su Hao glanced, raised his teacup, and continued sipping. He refused to say anything. After holding it for 10 seconds, Chatterbox Lu couldn't hold it anymore. Did you see this? This piece of paper in my hand contains intel on some of the most dangerous trainers in our generation. Su Hao showed some interest. Where did you get this intel? By talking to students from various schools, Do you expect them to keep it a secret? Were those students unethical? Su Hao did not think so. Lu Ren must have used his money to bribe them, or else he wouldn't have been able to get some much information within an hour. He looked over. The handwriting on the paper was a little messy. Nevertheless, he was able to comprehend it. The paper contained a lot of information. Look at this, Liang Yechen. He was a genius originally from An City but was pried away to Yunhua University-affiliated high school. His sprites are the little stone elephant and the glowing firefly. Both sprites' spiritual force is over 100. The stronger one, the glowing firefly, may have more than a 120. It is a powerful enemy. Lu Ren had a solemn expression. After he was done talking, he looked at Su Hao and then at himself, saying dejectedly, well, at least, he's a powerful enemy for me. There's another, Zhang Zhet. He is the #1 expert of Xing Yuan High School and a very wealthy second-generation heir. His sprite is a red horn bull. Su Hao saw that for Zhang Zhet, Lu Ren had collected a lot of information. Clearly, he was treating him as a strong rival. It might be that Zhang Zhe's family was probably more wealthy than Richie Lu. The red horn bull was a fire element sprite, similar to little charcoal tortoise. Moreover, its cultivation level was higher. No wonder Lu Ren was treating him as a strong rival. I'll show you even more powerful trainers. Lu Ren flipped over the paper. There were 2 names written there. Bing Ning, Lin Mingzheng. Old Su, I heard that these 2 are really sick, they are giants. For instance, Bing Ning is the heir of the country's #1 sect. Although she is not the only heir, you should understand what sects are. Of course, Su Hao had heard this before. A sect was not simply about improving or creating 1 or 2 unique skills. It needed to have a system, and its skills must have a unique style in combat, which could be passed down to the next generation. These were what made sects different. Basically, these were created by heavenly kings or perfected by generations of sprite masters. One could think of them as the equivalent of martial arts sects during ancient times. But there were not so many rules in modern times. The heirs of the sect would still need to attend high school and college. The sects would also have to work with the union and local associations, and not keep to themselves. Lu Ren added, her sect belongs to the ice element type, and Bing Ning's main force is an ice element white seal sprite. This sprite is a symbol of someone with extraordinary luck. He was envious. How strong is Bing Ning's white seal? Not even her classmates know. However, she has another sprite, a water element little seashell. That alone is already one of the strongest sprites in Yunhua First High. From her sprite configuration, it appears that she is not satisfied with only managing a sect, but wants to experiment and innovate. She is an ambitious woman. Old Su. Lu Ren wanted to continue but stopped and hesitated. After thinking about it, he said, our joint examination is about surviving. If you run into her, it's better to stay away. He was simply being honest here. Although Lu Ren's intel on Bing Ning was very simple and crude, Su Hao already was feeling the pressure after hearing about her 2 sprites. The development of Little Fire Crow was relatively slower compared to many top sprites. Would Silkworm Baby be able to manage alone? Su Hao was not sure. He asked, what about that Lin Mingzheng? What is his background? Chapter 52, all of them were testing the waters. Why are there so many people here? Moreover, tomorrow's the day of the joint examination, right? My memory isn't failing me, right? Su Hao was in a daze. Lu Ren was, too. After his thought process was stuck for a short while, he finally managed to say something. It's probably because the standard of the medical center in Battle Preparation Village is very high, so they aren't worried about being unable to recover. Su Hao couldn't stop himself from going nearer. He pulled a student aside and asked, what's going on here? What else can it be? Someone went up the arena, gave a few threats, and then they started to fight. They're already at the 18th round. Yunhua University Affiliated High School won 8 rounds, Yunhua First High won 7, and Sin Yuan High School won 3. As for us, An City First High. As he spoke, he suddenly saw a frontal view of Su Hao's face. Within a second, his facial expression went through one of dejection, shock, and then agitation. SS Su. Great God Su, you're finally here. He lowered his voice immediately after his cry of shock. Great God Su, are you able to deal with that guy up there? Su Hao looked over. The sprite on the arena was a teddy bear. After tossing a rock the size of a soccer ball up and down, it suddenly hurled the rock at a little ground wolf that had only entered the arena for 10 seconds and smashed it off the arena. The little ground wolf let out a whimper and collapsed. Its sprite trainer ran over to it with a pale face and carried it away. Su Hao took notice of his school uniform. He was from Ping City First High. The teddy bear's sprite trainer on the arena was a student from Yunhua University Affiliated High School. His chin was raised, and he had a very contemptuous look on his face. His eyes swept carefully across everyone in the venue, as well as their sprites. He paused for a moment, then mocked them outright. Isn't there even anyone here who can fight? F***CK. Number Yuan at percent number. Outside the arena, several students that hadn't accepted defeat hurled insults right back at him. They were also entirely justified in doing so. Their sprites had also won a few rounds. It was just that they had already exhausted their stamina, which resulted in those who went up the arena later, gaining an advantage over them. By the time the sprite trainer of the teddy bear entered the arena, there weren't many in the vicinity who could battle anymore. The 2 sprites which had carelessly entered the arena were taken care of easily too. In the arena, the sprite trainer from Affiliated High seemed to have lost the battle of insults. He snorted and promptly changed his target of mockery. What about Ping City First High and An City First High? Isn't there anyone there who can fight? The students from the 2 schools had rather awful looks on their faces. Yet their head count was the lowest, which caused them to come across as a little disadvantaged outside the arena. Even if they were to win by going at him one by one, they wouldn't be able to regain their pride. After a soft discussion among the students of Ping City First High, one of them left swiftly. From the look of it, it seemed like they were intending to call for reinforcements. In the arena, Teddy Bear's sprite trainer didn't seem anxious. He crossed his arms and waited patiently. The students of An City First High also wanted to call for reinforcements, but they spotted Lu Ren's pancake face the moment they turned around. And the man next to Lu Ren. Right away, their hearts settled. Su Hao noticed that in the arena, the sprite trainer from Affiliated High had also looked over. His gaze stayed on Little Fire Crow and Little Charcoal Tortoise for a very long time. For some reason, it felt like he was up to no good. While holding the angry Lu Ren back, he said, "Let me do it instead." Then, he brought Little Fire Crow with him and entered the battlefield. The battlefield here was more authentic than the one in school. Su Hao went up the stairs and arrived at the sprite trainer's command tower, which was the height of half a floor in a building. Little Fire Crow flew into the sky above the arena, which was 3 steps high. Let's begin. Su Hao noticed that the sprite trainer from Affiliated High, who originally had a scornful expression, became serious right away. Use rock throw. Teddy Bear, which was slightly over a meter tall, reached out and made a grabbing motion. Earth element spiritual force formed a brown rock the size of a basketball, which it hurled out with great force. It whizzed through the air. Little Fire Crow flapped its wings and was just about to dodge when the opposing sprite trainer revealed a triumphant smile, which came from the success of a devious ploy. Crush! Teddy Bear's paws slammed together. In midair, the brown basketball-sized rock exploded with a boom, the fragments falling toward Little Fire Crow like a rain of rocks. There was nowhere to dodge anymore. Just as Little Fire Crow instinctively wanted to use feather substitute, it heard a familiar voice coming from behind. Use Flaming Claw to take the blow. Right away, flames started burning on its claws, forming a gigantic claw of fire that swiped outwards with great momentum. The small, broken bits of rock shooting toward it were crushed. Only a portion of it sputtered toward the surroundings. With the gigantic claw of fire raised, Little Fire Crow swiftly drew near. What? Teddy Bear was clearly the close-quarters combat-style sprite here, wasn't it? Caught off guard, the boy from Affiliated High could only hastily give out a command. Use consecutive punch. A yellowish-brown glow enveloped Teddy Bear's fists. It threw out punch after punch, each punch strong and powerful. However, Little Fire Crow spread its wings and flew behind Teddy Bear. Its claw swiped downward. Boom! Its first move, Flaming Claw, made contact with the fist of Teddy Bear, which had turned around hastily. Teddy Bear stumbled backward. In its second move, Little Fire Crow took advantage of the momentum and went after it. It continued to swipe at it with Flaming Claw. Teddy Bear had already suffered injuries. The yellowish-brown glow around its fists was dimming. Its third move. Boom! The claw of fire landed on its face. The scratched and burned Teddy Bear rolled outward before it finally fell out of the arena. The Affiliated High student looked as if someone was strangling him by the throat, while the In-City First High students were incredibly excited. However, Su Hao didn't have any intention of staying behind. He merely waved at Lu Ren and then jumped off the command tower. Bringing Little Fire Crow with him, he left without even looking back. When he walked out of the battle hall doors, Su Hao saw the boy from Affiliated High picking Teddy Bear up in his arms and going over to another boy and lowering his head. "Boss, that person is named Su Hao. He's most likely the strongest one in In-City First High." The tall boy, whom he addressed as boss, squatted and touched the flame-patterned hound next to him. Then, he shook his head lightly. "If they are only of this standard, then In-City First High isn't of any concern at all. Let's go. Looks like all the real experts are being very cautious. No matter how much more conflicts we create, we won't be able to lure them out. But since we've sounded out In-City First High and some of the students from the other schools, this isn't a wasted trip." Bringing flame-patterned hound with him, the tall boy left the battle hall. Quite a few students from Affiliated High also left quietly. Lu Ren quickly caught up with Su Hao, leaving behind Little Charcoal Tortoise, which could only crawl along slowly. "Old Su, why didn't you let me show them up a little earlier? I think my chances of winning were pretty high too." Su Hao glanced at him. He was probably testing the waters for someone else just now. "Hey!" Lu Ren's jaw dropped. "Wouldn't you have given yourself, given Little Fire Crow away then, I mean? Had Little Fire Crow been given away? Not at all. Its most important skill, Feather Substitute, was still a secret. Even his own schoolmates weren't aware of it. The same went for Silkworm Baby. Even Lu Ren didn't know just how many trump cards Silkworm Baby had. Going by the amount of attention that students from the other schools were giving In-City First High, Su Hao felt that it was very likely that they didn't even know that he owned 2 sprites. When he thought of how Su Hao was the owner of 2 sprites and how the main unit was even Silkworm God, Lu Ren's heart was immediately put at ease. Somewhat curious, he asked, "That guy isn't weak. Who is he testing the waters for?" "The sprite trainer of a flame-patterned hound. He's pretty tall," replied Su Hao. What had caught his attention initially was the flame-patterned hound's extraordinariness. That was why he had paid a little more attention to its sprite trainer. Lu Ren realized who he was talking about the moment he said that. "That's Huang Ji, one of the strongest students in Affiliated High. So it's him. How strong is his flame-patterned hound?" Lu Ren took out a notebook excitedly. He replied, "It has a spiritual force limit of 144 points, and its tail has undergone special training. It's skilled at using flame spray, flaming bite." Su Hao quickly committed the information to memory. This information was actually even more detailed than anyone else's. Chapter 53, Intel Storm. At night, the holiday resort was as lively as ever. Huang Ji, one of the well-known candidates from affiliated high, was returning to the hotel. The forms of a few people were constantly flashing past his mind. He was analyzing how high his chances of victory would be, should he enter a battle with them. There's too little information available. There aren't even any records of their sprites battling at all. All of a sudden, the flame-patterned hound next to him let out a low growl. Huang Ji raised his head. He noticed someone who was wrapped snugly from head to toe and wearing a face mask standing in front of him. A face mask. It wasn't strange for people to wear that in winter. However, Huang Ji found the other party's behavior suspicious the moment he laid eyes on the person. The masked figure spoke at this point. With a rather strange accent, the person asked, "Hello, are you interested in buying intel?" Intel. Huang Ji's brows furrowed. He didn't trust intel that was sold by someone who behaved so strangely. Apart from a minority of ace students, he had information about the majority of students with even a bit of fame to their name. He even made an effort to gain an understanding of students who weren't that strong, and whom most affiliated high students overlooked, such as Su Hao and Lu Ren. He merely assumed that the masked figure was an intel broker making use of the opportunity to earn some cash. However, he didn't expect the masked figure to list information on a few familiar names the very next moment. Lu Wen, Ding Jiexu, Gu Minggrui. Do you have intel on their sprites? What I want is detailed information, not just the sprite species. The masked figure chuckled and replied right away, Lu Wen, sprite species silk cotton owl, spiritual force of 120 and above. It has wings that are wider than other sprites of the same species by approximately 6 centimeters. Huang Ji listened carefully. And the more he did, the more astonished he was. It was very likely that this information was real and not false information, which began with the name of a sprite species and then continued with lies. He could tell the difference. But all of a sudden, the masked figure stopped. Huang Ji panicked. Why did you stop? Go on. While rubbing his thumb against his index and middle fingers, the masked figure simply stared at him. It was as though Huang Ji could see the mockery in his eyes. No money. Do you think you can buy intel when you have no money? He didn't get mad. Instead, he glanced around very calmly. Good, no one was paying them any attention. He asked, how much? Lu Ren stretched out 2 fingers. 20,000? I want information on all of the others too. Excellent. They transferred the funds and exchanged the goods on the spot. Both parties were very satisfied. After Lu Ren left, when he looked at the extra 100,000 yuan in his bank account, even someone who came from a wealthy background like him couldn't help but feel that this sum of money simply came too easily. To rich kids like Huang Ji, even jacking up the price from 5,000 yuan to 20,000 yuan is letting him off too easily. This was Lu Ren's revenge on Huang Ji for his malicious way of sounding out his competitors earlier. He was also aware that Huang Ji could afford it. Compared to the difficulty in understanding a sprite, getting information on famous students' family background was much simpler. Lu Ren's eyes narrowed as he contemplated over who his next target should be. On the 5th floor of the hotel, a boy from Xing Yuan High School closed the door furtively before he beckoned to his roommate. Look what I just got my hands on. What is it? His roommate looked over. Data on the top 10 seeded candidates in the joint examination, and details of the sprites of 100 sprite trainers who are hard to handle. With this data, would we still need to worry about performing badly in the joint examination? The two of them exchanged a look. Sneaky laughter echoed in the room. Su Hao returned to the hotel room after dinner. He had already seen the sprites owned by the vast majority of his targets. Only a very small number of reclusive sprites had remained indoors, so Su Hao and Lu Ren didn't manage to see them even after walking about a few rounds. This included the ones belonging to the 2 people who presented the biggest threat. Fortunately, even with a few people fewer, the degree of perfection in their intel remained very high. There was absolutely no one who could compete with them. Su Hao sat on the bed and glanced around. Silkworm Baby was hogging the computer. On account of how he needed it to perform at its best the next day, Su Hao picked up his cell phone and started to read a novel instead. All of a sudden, the cell phone vibrated. A message directed at the whole school appeared at the top of the screen. It was from Class 2 of the Sprite stream. When he opened the message, he saw a somewhat familiar heading. It was a shared file titled Joint Examination Intel, Collector's Edition. Listed in the file was data on the sprites of about 100 students taking part in the joint examination. Su Hao tapped out of the file. It had already received a whole slew of impressive reactions from the group chat. Unable to resist, he also tapped on the impressive button. Su Hao wrote, "Impressive." Classmate A wrote, "It's Big Boss Su. Big Boss Su has appeared." Classmate B wrote, "Does Big Boss Su lack anyone clinging on for life support? Can you bring me with you tomorrow?" Sob, sob. Classmate C and the rest wrote, "Gonna be honest here, this data is certainly detailed, but Big Boss Su is actually not listed in the list of top 10 seeded candidates. They are looking down on us, and City First High." Su Hao chuckled sneakily. It would be strange if he was really listed in there. But this was clearly an information leak. Why was being listed in the intel a form of glory now? Before long, Lu Ren came back as well. Su Hao opened the group chat and showed it to him. Giving him a thumbs up, he said, "I'm impressed. Spreading all this information in such a short amount of time so calmly as expected of an expert." Unexpectedly, there was a look of exasperation on Lu Ren's face instead. "Do you think I'm dumb? I clearly wanted to earn some money instead." For the very first time, Lu Ren, who had had a taste of the benefits, had thought of earning his own money. But it's all thanks to piracy. Toward the end, by the time I approached my targets, all of them already had the full set of intel. Su Hao opened his mouth but chose to close it in the end. In any case, they had already earned quite a lot. They had also achieved their objective, and the effect was even better than what they had expected. On the top floors of the hotel, where the Sprite trainers in charge of the students were, Coach Xiang took a look at the printout of the collector's edition of the intel. After a while, he said with a hint of regret, "There are a few good seedlings in this batch of An City First High students, but there are even more in Affiliated High and Yunhua First High. Based on this information, there are already as many as 18 people in the case of students who have nurtured their sprites till they reached their spiritual force limits. It's likely that the sprites owned by Bing Ning from Affiliated High and Lin Ming Zheng from Yunhua First High have already reached entry level. If nothing out of the ordinary happens, the champion and first runner-up will be the two of them. But champion and first runner-up aside, Su Hao's chances of winning a spot in the top 10 should still be very high." Coach Xiang had very high hopes for Su Hao. It wasn't that Su Hao wasn't good enough. Rather, it was because the students from the other schools were simply too strong. Pan Jingshan took the printout from him and took a look. It isn't just a matter about their abilities, it's also a headcount issue. An City First High is at a disadvantage, no matter in which aspect. There's nothing we can do about it, though. If it had been the previous batches of students, it would have been tough for high schools of An City to even come up with students who could make it to the top 50. Even though they didn't hold high hopes, they weren't depressed either. Winning and losing was very normal in school competitions. It was also very understandable that An City First High couldn't match up to key high schools of Yunhua. On the other hand, I feel that the student who came up with this set of data is the one who's truly something. There's going to be a good show in the joint examination this time. 8 a.m., the next day. Su Hao and the other students followed their teachers and arrived at the north of Battle Preparation Village, where the entrance to the forest was. Students from different schools assembled in different areas. Right away, the disparities in strength were clear. An City First High and Ping City First High had the lowest headcount. There were only 100-odd people. There were slightly more people, about 200-odd, from Sing Yuan High School. There were more than 500 students from the Sprite stream of Yunhua University-affiliated high school. As for Yunhua First High, which had the highest headcount, they had close to 800 people there. Because Yunhua City was a big city, the ratio of third-year students opting for the Sprite stream in a single batch was far higher than normal cities like An City and Ping City. This caused an extremely obvious disparity in numbers. Chapter 54, Rules in the Beginning. Silence. A man wearing a cape stepped forward. I am Zhou Weiping, the leader of the team of judges in the joint examination this time. Now, I shall announce the rules of the joint examination. Everyone, behave in a disciplined manner. Zhou Weiping's voice was loud and clear. Even without any voice amplification devices, his voice could be heard over the sound of the wind. It reached everyone's ears. His aura was even more impressive, as if he was Coach Xiong's tyrant bear. He intimidated everyone there right away. Su Hao found him a little familiar to the eye. He seemed to have heard his name somewhere before as well. After a moment of wondering, a name of great fame flashed across his mind: the wave-riding Heavenly King, Zhou Weiping. So it's him. A Heavenly King, in the flesh. But was a small and unassuming joint examination like this enough to get a Heavenly King over? Were the schools that capable? Su Hao wasn't sure. In the vicinity, several visibly agitated students also recognized Zhou Weiping. However, under Zhou Weiping's strong presence, they remained well behaved and stood where they were, not daring to make any inappropriate actions. Zhou Weiping began to announce the rules of the joint examination. At the start of the joint examination, everyone is to draw lots to determine their starting positions and enter the forest in batches from the 23 entrances south of the primordial area. Your mission is to arrive at the finishing point 80 kilometers away within 3 days. Su Hao understood now. Like what they had predicted, it was a survival in the wilderness mission lasting 3 days. However, towers would be set up in the primordial forest area to provide examination candidates with supplies. Everything was available there, including food and other necessities. The examination mainly assessed them on their battle capabilities and concealment tactics in a complex environment. This was a test on the overall quality of the students. This was much more difficult than in the past, where they needed only to exercise their mouth muscles and command the sprites on the battlefield. Many of the students were sporting dreadful looks on their faces. It had nothing to do with how strong or weak their sprites were. Just thinking about the fact that they had to travel such a long distance on foot already filled them with hopelessness. But Zhou Weiping didn't let them off. He continued to speak. There are a large number of sprites that still retain their wild nature in the primordial forest area. Most of them are in their adulthood. Even though they have never undergone specialized nurturing, they possess a certain degree of battle power nonetheless. In addition, there is a chance that there are entry-level sprites in the primordial forest. Other than wild sprites, all the other exam candidates are also your competitors. Defeating a sprite earns you 1 to 3 points, while defeating a candidate entitles you to half of the points they have. Those who are unable to reach the finishing point within the stipulated time limit will receive the same treatment as those who are defeated and lose half of their accumulated points. Lastly, the number of points you have will determine your ranking. On behalf of the Green-Blue Sprite breeding base, the top 10 will receive a surprise reward from me. After saying that, Zhou Weiping paused for a moment before he then said, "Teachers, please distribute the joint examination equipment now." After he finished, Su Hao discovered that old Chen, his form teacher, was opening a box. Silver wristbands were lined up vertically inside. These are known as defense wristbands. They emulate sprite commandeering, protection, and can form a light shield around the user and withstand attacks to a certain extent, explained Zhou Weiping, who was standing a fair distance away. His expression turned a little sterner as he said, "Let me remind you again, wild sprites will not be so foolish as to solely battle your sprites. The purpose of the defense wristbands is precisely to provide you with a means of protection. Similarly, the joint examination does not have any battle restrictions. You can also command your sprites to attack other students directly, and exhaust the energy in their defense wristbands. When the wristband's energy level is reduced to 50%, it will sound a warning. When it is reduced to 30%, it means that you've been defeated and eliminated. Related personnel will then bring you out of the examination venue. There is also a button on the wristband that you can press to call for help. Should any of you be unable to hang in there or meet with any danger, you can call for help. This will also be seen as elimination. The rules could be said to be both complex and simple. Su Hao concluded that in general, what they were supposed to do was to set off and head to the finishing point and defeat all the students and wild sprites they encountered along the way. Yap, that was right. Su Hao put on the wristband. A thin light shield immediately appeared around him, as though isolating him from everything else in the surroundings. At this point, Heavenly King Zhou reached the end of his instructions. You can choose to form teams, with 3 in a team being the maximum. The points gained will be distributed evenly among the team. You can also choose to go solo. You have 5 minutes to confirm your teams and submit the name list. When Heavenly King Zhou finished, Su Hao immediately felt gazes landing on him from all around. Student A looked bashful. Student B had a bright and intense look in his eyes. Li Songting was staring at him. Gulan Jiao also intended to form a team. Lu Ren merely felt intense pressure, as though a mountain pressing on him. Looking out there, everyone here was a competitor. Old Su, boss, don't abandon me. Su Hao stretched his arm out and interrupted Lu Ren, who was close to sobbing. Then, he said something which disappointed all of them. I'm going solo. All of you can do what you want. But I'd suggest that you team up with Li Songting and Gulan Jiao. In the whole of An City First High, apart from himself, the 3 were the only presentable ones. The cultivation standards of their sprites were about the same, and they could even make up for each other's shortcomings. Thus, teaming up was the most appropriate choice of action. As for himself, Su Hao was gunning for the top 3 positions. Forming a team meant that the points would be evenly distributed, which would cut him off from the top 3 spots for sure. Without any hesitation whatsoever, he chose to go solo. A short while later, the entrances that the candidates were supposed to go to were determined. Su Hao was at entrance 18, while Lu Ren and his team were at entrance 11. Under the lead of a sprite trainer judge, Su Hao and the other candidates that were supposed to go through entrance 18 rode the tourist sightseeing vehicle to the corresponding location. Groups of examination candidates entered in sequential order. The interesting thing was that even though the entrance number was given out randomly, the sequence of students entering wasn't. Weaker students went in first, while those whose sprites had a higher cultivation level, and those with good battle results, were placed at the back. This sequence didn't differ much from the Collector's Edition Intel report. Su Hao was last in the sequence. Next, candidate Su Hao, said the expressionless judge. Su Hao straightened his clothes. He brought his 2 sprites with him, got up, and headed toward the primordial forest. After walking a short distance, when he looked out into the distance, what surrounded him were gigantic trees that were a few floors tall. Thick foliage blocked the sky from his view. Only specks of sunlight shone through the leaves. Is merely setting out 10 minutes later enough to let everyone disappear from sight? He was also aware that the weaker candidates would definitely run away as fast as they could. Wild sprites were where regular candidates would be getting their points from. Su Hao looked around him. He discovered some traces of footsteps. But after inspecting them for a while, he realized that he didn't know how to track others down at all. Su Hao asked Silkworm Baby, "Do you know how to?" "Gurgle gurgle, gurgle." "Oh right, I have to look for a supply point first. I remember supply points are towers, right?" Little Fire Crow. Little Fire Crow flapped its wings, weaved through the dense tree foliage, and flew upward. Soon, it came back. Squawk! Su Hao nodded and headed in the direction pointed out by Little Fire Crow. Perhaps because he was still in the outer boundaries of the primordial forest, Su Hao only discovered one lonesome sprite even after walking for more than 10 minutes. He gently pushed the bushes apart. It's a fluffy ball, probably a wild sprite. Let's quietly circle to the back. Before he even finished, Silkworm Baby had already hurled a mini energy ball at it. The table tennis ball-sized energy ball shot out with a whoosh and threw the fluffy ball out with a boom. The silver wristband vibrated. +1 point. Su Hao's forehead was covered with black lines. Just as he was about to say something, he heard Silkworm Baby's cries. His gaze followed the direction where it was pointing, and he saw a white tower piercing through the tops of the trees in the distance. Chapter 55, Encountering a Seated Candidate. Originally, there weren't any paths in the primordial forest area. However, as more and more candidates passed through the forest, paths gradually formed. Su Hao walked ahead. Dense leaves and branches drooped and blocked his way. He didn't bother brushing them aside. Instead, he allowed the leaves and branches to brush across his face. Just as they were about to come into contact with him, a gentle force pushed them away. It was the protective light shield from the wristband. By right, apart from sprites, there should have been quite a lot of insects, birds, and animals in a dense forest like this. Among which, there were probably poisonous bugs and snakes too. They didn't pose any less of a threat than wild sprites to examination candidates. Prickly brambles and sharp, broken branches could also cut through the candidates' clothes and injure them too. Only people with a lot of experience living in the wild could survive in such an environment. Su Hao and the others were just a bunch of young students in their third year of high school. What they were learning was sprite cultivation and battling, not survival tactics in the wild. Thus, the protective light shield of the wristband gave the candidates a huge sense of security. As long as they didn't head into danger deliberately, the energy consumption caused to the wristband by a few branches in their way or a few scratches from the bushes was negligible. After Su Hao got used to it, he didn't push the bushes apart with his hands anymore. Doing this would save him some time too. As for complex areas that were difficult to pass through, he either went around them or got Silkworm Baby or Little Fire Crow to create an opening. It didn't take long for him to reach the supply tower. A tall white tower stood in front of Su Hao. Green vines covered the rock wall exterior. Mottled marks, possibly left behind by wild sprites, were vaguely visible on it. There were also traces of reparation and restoration on it, which filled the tower with an aged feeling. Right opposite him was a metal door. It was already wide open at this point. According to the rules, every tower contained a different number of supply kits, which varied in quality. However, each candidate was only allowed to take one from each tower. They couldn't take more as well because surveillance cameras had been set up in the towers. Supply kits could also be found in various spots within the forest. Although the timing of my arrival must be later than most people, if I were the examiner, surely I would provide a larger number of supply kits than exam candidates in the first supply tower, right? Su Hao wondered as he headed toward the tower. Then, he bumped head-on into 3 people moving hastily. It was a team of 3. They were holding supply kits the size of briefcases in their hands, meaning they had only emerged from the tower just a moment ago. 4 pairs of eyes stared at each other. The atmosphere abruptly froze. It's him. The expressions of the 3-man team changed slightly. None of them were fools. Based on the sequential order that they had entered the forest in, the one in the last place definitely presented the greatest threat. The strongest student in an city first high owns 2 sprites, a Silkworm Baby and a Little Fire Crow. Data on Su Hao surfaced in their minds. Although he was a far cry from the aces in their school, they were just normal students of Yunhua First High after all. It wasn't as if they were big bosses. But to their backs was the White Tower, while Su Hao blocked their way ahead. The three of them exchanged a look. Then, they decided to take action. At the very least, they still had an advantage in terms of numbers. Under their sprite trainer's command, a grassland wolf, a thread spider, and a dotted mushroom, which looked like the personification of a mushroom, started to gurgle. Silkworm Baby struck first. It leaped high into the air and sprayed a misty green light from its mouth granule machine gun. Countless specks of green light coalesced into a light beam, which swept across the three sprites with a whoosh. Dust and earth flew everywhere around the three sprites. Their pained cries and whimpers could be heard amidst the swirling dust. A brief moment later, Grassland Wolf collapsed. Thread Spider was sprawled on the ground, while Dotted Mushroom had fainted. Sprites were creatures birthed by nature. They didn't bleed when they were injured. There wasn't anything like the ground being dyed red by blood, or the sprites coughing up their innards, or any other scenes like that. But it was also obvious that the three sprites were covered in injuries. And this was even the result of Silkworm Baby holding back, or rather, conserving its spiritual force. The three sprite trainer interns from Yunhua First High were in disbelief. While staring at Grassland Wolf, which was struggling to get up after it had collapsed, the sprite trainer intern standing in the middle clenched his fists. "Get up! Come on, Grassland Wolf, get up!" A cursor-like ray of light appeared above his fists. Sprite commandeering, persist. It allows a sprite to have a final burst of battle power at the critical moment when it is approaching its limit. Howl! With great difficulty, Grassland Wolf braced itself against the ground and tried to get up. Swoosh! A peanut-sized granule came flying over. With a thwack, it suppressed Grassland Wolf's final wave of perseverance right away. It was game over for Grassland Wolf. A breeze blew past them, blowing the dust around them away. A smile appeared on Su Hao's lips. In the eyes of the three-man team, his smile was as though that of the devil. "Are you going to surrender? Or are you going to surrender?" One of the candidates picked up Thread Spider and immediately started to run to the side. But he had only taken a couple of steps when a claw of fire threw him backward. Although the light shield protected him, he suffered a pretty bad fall nonetheless. The Thread Spider in his arms was curled up into a ball, so it didn't suffer another bout of injuries. When he got back up on his feet, he noticed that the light shield's energy level had already decreased by 10%. No longer taking any more chances, he said, "I surrender." Then, he pressed the button on his wristband. His other two teammates pressed the buttons on their wristbands as well. A vibrating notification came from Su Hao's wristband at once. He looked at it +1 point. "In other words, the three of you have only defeated 2 sprites." Su Hao lost interest right away. After taking a supply kit from the tower, as well as the hardtack crackers and 2 bottles of water from the team's supply kits along the way, he brought Silkworm Baby and Little Fire Crow with him and entered the bushes, leaving behind the 3 miserable candidates. The deeper one went into the primordial forest area, the denser the foliage was. It gave off a sinister feeling. Silkworm Baby led the way in front, while Su Hao stayed in the middle. Little Fire Crow hovered over him and kept a lookout. All of a sudden, the vines entwined around the tree trunks along the path where he was walking seemed to come to life. A few vines shot toward him, as though ropes. Fireball! Even though Su Hao heard their movements, he didn't turn to look. He had faith that his sprites would be able to determine the direction in which danger was coming from. Instantly, a huge ball of fire shot out and set the vines whizzing toward him on fire. The ball of fire then landed on the tree trunk and exploded with a boom, exposing the few vine snakes entwined around the tree trunk as camouflage. They scattered from the tree trunk and weaved through the shrubs before they disappeared. Only the rustling of leaves could be heard coming from the bushes in the vicinity. "Wing attack," he ordered. The black feathers on Little Fire Crow extended continuously and formed a pair of gigantic wings in the blink of an eye. The wings swept through the surroundings, uprooting the bushes. Right away, the vine snakes slithering towards them were thrown out by the black wings, the sharp feathers of the wings leaving innumerable cuts on them. As though they had realized that little Fire Crow wasn't easy to deal with, the vine snakes came and went quickly. They even knew to split up as they escaped. But how could Su Hao, or rather, Silkworm Baby, bear to watch its points escape? Many energy balls shot out of its mouth one by one. Amidst loud explosive blasts, all the vine snakes fainted, ashes and dust covering them all over. Silkworm Baby didn't kill them. Although the sprites looked as if they were heavily injured, in truth, with the self-recovery abilities of sprites, they would be able to regain mobility in half a day. As long as they didn't encounter any other enemies. What would happen after he left was something he couldn't predict. But for the time being, whether it was himself, Silkworm Baby, or Little Fire Crow, none of them could bring themselves to kill them just yet. Neither was there any need to do so in the joint examination. For the sake of the primordial forest area's continued development, the judges' team had also suggested that just defeating them would do. However, Su Hao felt that he would need to overcome this hurdle in the future. He turned and looked at the large tree that had taken a fireball attack head-on. A large area of the trunk was black and charred. However, the flames didn't spread and had already extinguished. Su Hao let out a breath of relief. Giving the order to use fireball had been a pure reflex, though it was also because Little Fire Crow was right above him. But since the schools had set this place as the examination site, this forest shouldn't catch fire that easily, right? This forest was fascinating, indeed. Apart from the trees that were big and tall, Su Hao also noticed irregular crystallized solids on the trunks of a few trees. In the beginning, he had thought that it was his imagination, but as he went deeper into the forest, the more trees with crystallized solids there were. He couldn't help but wonder about it. He opened a pack of hardtack crackers along the way. He took a bite. It was utterly tasteless. Then, he fed it to Silkworm Baby and Little Fire Crow. The two of them also despised it but ate it seriously nonetheless. At this point, Silkworm Baby glanced at the bushes, which were as tall as a human, a short distance away. Little Fire Crow also turned wary. The bushes parted. A slightly familiar-looking figure walked out. "It's you."